And welcome into a special Hoopsville interview here with Dan Dutcher, the Vice President of Division III, not just basketball at the NCAA. We obviously talked earlier this season on Hoopsville, and I appreciate you coming on there, but had to take advantage of the situation you're here in Salem and sit down and actually have a conversation with you, so thank you for taking the time to do so.
Thanks for having me back to Hoopsville. It's a real pleasure. Delighted to be here in Salem and happy to have a chance to chat.
Obviously, we're airing this on our Hoopsville wrap-up show, but we've also posted this on the D3 Hoops site. So in case you're wondering, it's not just for Hoopsville, it's for the rest of D3Hoops.com as well. Let's talk first and foremost, get a chance here to be in Salem for the first time in a number of years to see the championships. Your thoughts, especially in comparison. Obviously, we haven't, this is being taped before we've seen the championship, but your thoughts on what you've seen, especially over the years since being back to Salem.
Well, it always strikes me what a great job Salem and the ODAC do in hosting all the championships that I've been to here. They do such a good job in terms of supporting players, fans, the signage, the facilities. It's a first-class championships experience that's on par with any student-athlete experience I've seen in any division. It's a real credit for the hard work and commitment of the folks in Salem and the ODAC who host so many of our championships and do such a great job in that regard. Certainly, the last time I was back, I think, was 2005. I've just seen the championship grow with interest and support in so many ways. And my hat's off to those folks and compliment them for their hard work.
There's obviously every once in a while conversation. Is there anybody bidding against Salem? Those who don't get to Salem sometimes would like to see it in a different location, maybe a little more centralized in the United States or at least in Division III. We see the women move around every 2 years because no one has seemed to grasp the championship like Salem seems to have grasped it. I mean, in the physical sense of the word.
Right.
Are there ever other bids against Salem? Are there bids currently against Salem? What is the future of the championships here in Salem on the men's basketball side?
Well, the selection of the host site really is the responsibility of the sport committee, in this case the men's basketball committee. I'm not aware of any specific bids that have been submitted by potential hosts. I would never say never that that's off the table, but at the same time, Salem's done such a good job, and ODAC has done such a good job hosting. I think there's probably a sense among the committee that if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And so clearly we wouldn't preclude the consideration of bids. But at this point, I'm not aware of any on the table. If they're submitted, they would go through the regular review process from the basketball committee onto the championships committee.
Would you like to see a women's site kind of like Salem grasp and take it as their own, or is it seem to work this moving it every couple of years to a different site, though it's certainly repeated in Holland? So.
Well, we really have to rely on the women's basketball committee and judgment in that regard. They seem very pleased with the extent of the support that they received. Most recently, as you suggested, at home. If they find a suitable location that is interested in becoming a permanent site, certainly that's something that we would look at. Ultimately, this is all about the quality of the student-athlete experience, and that's what we're trying to maximize.
Speaking of that, because both Illinois Wesleyan teams got to the Final Fours, there's a lot of talk about making them one location like soccer does on the men's and women's side and have the entire experience at one site. Do you think that could work with basketball, or is that something the NCAA would rather keep separate the way it's working so far? I realize the two committees have to kind of come together on that as well.
It's a really interesting question, and those kinds of discussions are underway not only within specific sports within Division III, but also across the divisions and in multiple sports. So, for example, if you look at the model that takes place in men's lacrosse, where D1, D2, and D3 finals take place, that's been a very successful model. I think we're starting to see active consideration of sites that might allow us to maximize student-athlete experience in the championships, hosting opportunities across the divisions and other sports. So I think we're open to that idea. Our championship staff, I think, is trying to think out of the box and think creatively. And again, it's all about maximizing the student-athlete experience. Division II, for example, has done their student athlete festival, and that's been another way in which their student athlete experience has been maximized. So we're open to those kinds of suggestions.
You bring up lacrosse, obviously D1, D2, 3 on the men's side, all playing together. It's sometimes very big stadiums. M&T Bank Stadium in Baltimore. We played it in Philly. We played it up at Foxborough in Boston, or outside of Boston. Lacrosse is enough of a niche sport that it doesn't matter what division people want to come and see those games played. Could you imagine in basketball that being a model that works in the long run, where the huge D1 tournament is also got a D2 and a D3 game inside of it?
I think we would have to start very selectively, very carefully, and see how that opportunity would present itself and see how successful that would be. So before you can, I think, envision a long-term commitment, maybe you can look at a one-off opportunity and test it and see how that goes. Another example is in ice hockey, I believe, either next year or the subsequent year, there's active discussions about conducting the D3 men's finals and the off day between the D1 men's semis and the D1 finals. So those kinds of opportunities are being explored in multiple sports.
You speak of the one-off, there is a lot of talk, a lot of speculation that the championship for Division III men's basketball and the championship for Division II basketball next year will be played in Atlanta at the site of the Division I Final Four, played obviously in the off day to celebrate the 75th anniversary of basketball and NCAA. I realize nothing's official or anything on those lines. It is speculation and rumor, but it seems like that is one of those opportunities that could be looked at. Is there serious discussion about it?
I think it's a fair question, and that is, in fact, under review right now. Nothing's been decided. I would imagine if anything is going to be decided, probably will take place within the next few weeks. I think we recognize as a national office staff that there are opportunities to celebrate men's basketball in conjunction with next year's recognition of the 75th anniversary of the men's championship qualifier. And so opportunities are being pursued. I think anytime you look at those opportunities, again, you have to use that measuring stick of does this in fact enhance the student athlete experience. We would never want to pursue something that would treat Division III as a sideshow, if you would, but the quality of the D3 experience, the focus on the D3 student athlete experience would have to be significant. That would be under review. I think anytime you look at changing the administrative framework, that comes with certain costs of time, costs of administration, commitments that are in place right now relating to next year's event that we would have to investigate whether or not those commitments could be altered.
Obviously in Division III, we talk a lot about openness, we talk a lot about transparency, because there's so many different selections, there's so many different things that take place when it comes to making a bracket, making a tournament, making bids, etc., etc. Part of that openness has been seeing regional rankings released. We see final regional rankings. We see what everybody's thinking. We get strength of schedule numbers. We get regional numbers, so everybody can kind of check and balance the system. And I thought this year did a very good job getting the statistics system on board. We didn't really have many things that we went, oh, wait a minute, that regional ranking isn't correct, or the strength of schedule is not correct. But we've seen kind of a step backwards a little bit in our final regional rankings, for example. I know you are a proponent of openness. I know you're a proponent of transparency. What can still be done to make it more open and more transparent so that the general person in California and the general person in, say, Maryland can understand everything as equal as possible?
I think we are always open to our process, to try to be sure that it makes as much sense as it can, not only to the insiders, if you will, but also to the general public. We've undergone a comprehensive review of our business practices in the championships realm, and tried to standardize some of those practices in a way that makes sense. One of the challenges we've had is that over time, each sport committee has sort of evolved into separate business practices that sometimes seem conflicting and may not make a lot of sense. So we really rely on the sport committees and the championships committee, as well as our championship staff, to try to address those kinds of issues. I think moving forward, one of the things that we all need to recognize is the data that folks and committees use to help make their decisions. As you know, it's not the end-all be-all. No. It's just a tool that committees use to help make the difficult decisions they need to use. The regional advisory groups do a great job. Their recommendations, again, are tools that the sport committees use to help make decisions. We've had interest in making some of that data more available, maybe through the web, for example. That kind of information, that kind of access is an example of data, that information that we continue to look at and to try to consider to what extent should that information be made available to broader groups. Each committee, the advisory committees, the sport committees, they play an important role in the process. Number one, we want to be sure that those groups have the best information possible to help make the difficult decisions that they make.
You talk about the committees and being, getting them all on the same kind of page in some senses of the word. Obviously, selections of football teams with a much smaller tournament compared to women's basketball with a much different tournament, a bigger tournament, a broader. Apples and oranges in some cases, but let's go men and women's basketball, for example. Men have a weighted average that has home and away games weighted. Women do not. How the men go about their process seems different from one of my conversations are than the women's process. What the women are doing with their regional racks, similar, but still different than the men's. Is there an effort to say to both these men's and women's, while your sports are certainly different, there has to be something that's at least equal, even, similar, so that everyone understands the process, instead of looking at one and going, they have a process and the other one has a B process, and that can confuse people.
I think there's always an interest in trying to make things consistent in a way that makes sense. If specific sport committees have separate or different criteria that they use, and we're unsure that that's fair to use. That's sort of an ongoing commitment, an ongoing review that the championships committee ultimately is responsible for, because those sports committees report to the championships committee.
Openness also includes a lot of schools shifting to Division III. We have seen a huge influx in the last few years. It doesn't seem to be stopping, which is good, but I also start to wonder, is big getting too big? Division III already outnumbers Division I and II by far, but is it getting to a point maybe where this is getting too big, that NCAA either has to stop and say enough, or they have to say to some schools, we need you in a different division, or, worst case, Division IV comes up, but not for the original reasons, strictly because we just have a lot of schools.
Well, the numbers may not, the recent number trends may not be consistent with your assumptions. Now, we have grown significantly as a division. We added about 130 schools since 1990. So we're at about 436 active schools now. We have another dozen or so somewhere in that number. We have a limit of 4 schools per year that can join.
Okay.
The last couple of years, we didn't have any new groups that started a membership process. So we probably will stabilize somewhere between 445 or 50 or so over the next 6-7 years. I think looking down the road, the Division III is the largest division in the NCAA for a reason. It's no accident. We have a very compelling model. Student athlete experience is fabulous. It's athletics for great reasons. So there's a reason why folks want to join Division III. Sure. Having said that, it's not for every institution. And I do wonder to what extent are additional schools out there, if you will, that are willing to make the philosophical commitment that involves not awarding athletics, and also involves a broad-based sports program. our sports sponsorship requirements are significant. If you have more than 1,000, you have at least 12 sports. That takes a significant commitment of resources. If you're willing to not award athletics aid, that takes a significant philosophical commitment on behalf of the institution. How many schools are not in Division III now that will be willing to make that commitment? To be frank, about 2/3 of our members that have joined Division III since 1990 came from the
Yeah.
I wouldn't imagine that there are a lot of schools that are still in that organization that might be willing to make that commitment. We're seeing more and more schools who are interested in joining. 2-year schools transitioning to a 4-year program. All 4-year institutions that are starting an athletics program and look at Division III as the model.
I know with the growth as well, we've looked at regions, especially on the basketball side. We have some very weighted regions. Northeast is gigantic, East Atlantic small, numbers-wise. Is there, from conversations here in Salem, I've gathered there's a strong indication we're about to see regional realignment in some sense of the word. I don't know what it is. But it seems like in lacrosse, they've got 2 regions. It seems like it needs 4. In football, they have 4. It might be worth going to 8. I'm throwing these out there. I'm not saying they're for sure. Right. But is there a thought with the growth of many teams, but schools, but also growth of sports like lacrosse, which is growing gangbusters in a number of schools, thought of redoing a lot of these regions and also trying to make them a little bit more cohesive across the board?
It is, in fact, that review's underway. The Championships Committee has spearheaded it over the last year or so. They have explored a comprehensive review of all of the regional alignments across all of our sports. The challenge is, one of the challenges is that with different sports you have different sponsorship numbers. So you'll never be able to use the same regions.
Right.
But I think one of the goals that we could attain would be in sports with similar sponsorship numbers, using similar nomenclature for the regions and trying as much as possible to achieve consistency in regional alignments and regional applications. What region you play in generally ought to be as consistent as possible across sports. You always ought to be in the same region as the rest of the school conference.
Sure.
Those are a couple goals that are attainable. Another result of that discussion, I think, has to do with who you play. Yeah. And that piece has received some very interesting discussion as well. Starting with the Division III philosophy statement, which says primary emphasis in Division III should be on regional and conference competition. We're always going to give extra emphasis in Division III to competing within your region and within your conference. As part of this overall comprehensive review of regional alignment, the Championships Committee is recommending that you be required to play at least 70% of the contests in sport within your region and or within your conference. At the same time, there's discussion about then allowing other contests against Division III opponents to also to get more credit for contests against other Division III opponents in the secondary selection criteria. And that, I think, would be a significant input and progress for, be a little bit of a change for the division in giving you a little bit more credit for the contests that you decide to play outside of the region, providing you have that
Final question before we let you go. A lot of changes in Division III. Overall, it certainly has grown a long way. And people certainly love Division III for Division III. If you were to give any final thought on your thinking of Division III from your perspective, what would it be?
I think it's important for fans of Division III to remember the importance of advocating the division to the general public, to your friends, to your family, to your colleagues, and to be sure that folks understand what makes Division III special and what makes it unique. To recognize that Division III isn't necessarily better than the other divisions, but it is a very strong. And we want to be sure that folks understand when they student athletes, prospects, moms and dads, when you're making the decision about what division and what institution to attend, the opportunities that are available in the division to get a great education, to compete in a very competitive athletics program, and also to be able to explore and experience the full range of opportunities that are available on campus. Campus activities, study abroad, those kinds of experiences that other students have are the essence of the Division III student athlete experience. We want to be sure that folks understand that's what Division III is about. It's not a glorifying units program, it's a very competitive athletics program that also presents to our student athletes a very unique opportunity to pursue their athletic interests, their academic interests, and to develop as citizens for success after the collegiate experience.
Dan Dutcher, Vice President of Division III for the NCAA, joining me here on Hoopsville. Thanks so much for joining me. I appreciate it.
Thank you, my pleasure.
I'll talk to you soon.
How cool is that?